Hello, my name is Ian Scales, you're watching TelecomTV, and we're at the Smart IoT London conference, where I'm talking to Boris Adryan, who is a Royal Society Research Fellow and he's founder of thingslearn. Boris, welcome to TelecomTV.
Thank you.
We're going to talk mostly about data, really crunchy data stuff here. And I want to talk about openness, and I want to talk about all things fundamental to data, big data, and all the rest of it. Tell me a little bit about your work and how it relates to IoT.
So for the past 8 years, I've ran a research group at the University of Cambridge, and we looked at the applications of machine learning in the biosciences. At some stage, I realized that what I was doing on an everyday basis also applied very much to big data sets in the real world, such as IoT. And so over the years I shifted more and more towards becoming an entrepreneur and doing my own thing with thingslearn.
Right. And what are some of the areas that you think need the most attention in terms of capturing data and manipulating large data sets?
Well, there are several different applications of the number crunching to IoT data. So first there is the classical batch processing, so you collect a bunch of data and then you apply a method to what you have collected over a period of time. And then there is, of course, real-time analytics, so that you try to capture information from the data stream as it is coming in and try to present really what's essential about this data.
And have you've found a very fruitful, your previous researches and things into molecular structures and so on, you found that very helpful in terms of how you apply that to IoT?
Well, I think it's always good to get a good grounding in your toolbox if you apply to one particular vertical. In my case, it was the biosciences. But as soon as you're comfortable with using those tools, you can really apply computation methods in any sort of application.
And what sort of applications are you looking at enhancing?
Anything really. So I've looked at machine vibration, for example, as a predictor of failure. I've looked at the occupancy of parking spaces in London. I'm currently talking to a service provider who wants to really move from selling hardware to selling a service and wants to see how that can be underpinned with data.
Okay, and give me an idea of the process then. You can basically construct a model from a whole lot of data that you get. Say it's parking. You can grab data from different types of object or sets of objects and then manipulate that and analyze it to come up with maybe the gems of a business plan for doing something.
So in this one particular case, the reason for doing analytics was twofold. So one was to see whether we could use temporal predictions. So on the basis of a history of parking lot occupancy, whether we could predict occupancy in the future. The advantage of that is that if you know that you can model the occupancy of a particular space, then you only need to sample with a sensor at that space probably at half the rate, which then extends your battery lifetime, so there's money saving.
Yeah.
Because these things are really very, very expensive to maintain. They are easy to deploy, but essentially once they've been buried in the ground and they need their battery changed, you need to dig a hole. And the other application was to look at deployment patterns. So you can imagine that there are sometimes regions where you really need to know each and every state of a parking space, because the occupancy is just so random. So imagine a busy street, then whenever people really leave a parking space, someone else will park there, etc., etc. Whereas in residential areas, you might have indicator spaces. So this parking space is so bad that only if that is occupied, then I know that there is no hope in the rest of the road.
Yes. So you can sample things to work out what the overall state is.
That's right.
If you do it carefully. Yes. Now, it strikes me that a lot of these applications are going to be drawing data from different sets of devices and different databases essentially.
Yes, that's true.
And to do that effectively, of course, you've got to have some measure of compatibility and openness around the data. How important is that, and where do the difficulties lie in that area?
Well, you've just addressed my biggest headache, because very often the machine learning methods that we are using, they are decades old. But to get our hands on the right data in the right format, that's really a big difficulty. So interoperability between devices, that is something that needs to be addressed essentially on an engineering level, but also interoperability and data sharing as a general concept. And I think this is a mindset that we still have not really all ingested. And it's important in the future that if you want to have your product integrated in the Internet of Things, then it's not enough to just take that data and store it away in your silo, but you need to make sure that the user can control what aspects of that data he or she wants to make available to other third parties in order to gain an added value from that.
Yes, absolutely. And do you see, I see that as a critical part of the development of this industry. What's the problem? Because is it about companies seeing data as the value? In other words, that's the thing you keep to yourself and you don't let anybody else use, because that's the thing you're going to make money out of. Do we have a basic fundamental problem with the business models as they're developing?
I think it is because there is the value in the data that companies want to hold on to them. The second is, and I think this is very much an invented excuse, concerns about privacy. So you may probably recall the case where one could monitor Fitbit activity levels just by Googling a user's name and then retrieving that information. And that, of course, is a red flag to everyone really interested in privacy. But, of course, if such process would be nicely regulated and the user had a chance to say, I grant company X this privilege and company Y a different sort of access level, then all of these problems would be solved.
Right.
However, that requires investment on behalf of the company who gathers the data in the first place, because obviously it's their implementation.
Or it requires political understanding from the people who buy it and who therefore insist that that capability be invested in the product from the beginning.
Well, I hope that this is going to be a major issue in the future, that if a consumer has the choice between two different products, companies who open up and who essentially are happy to interface with other players in the IoT space are hopefully going to win.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
How do we push that process forward? Is it a political thing? Is it a consumer rights thing?
I think it's very much on the consumer, because I mean IoT is really very new when we think about consumer products. In the M2M space, everything is very much driven by particular business processes. So there are negotiations right from the beginning to the end, what data needs to be in which format in order to make this process happen. Whereas at the moment, if you go into your local Marks and Spencer's and you look into the shelf, there might be 5 different products doing all very much the same. If none of them really support the sort of standards that you want, you just leave them be.
Yes.
You wait until the first one opens up, maybe at a higher price point because services need to be paid for. But things that really integrate into the IoT as an ecosystem should hopefully be the selling point.
Yeah. That's quite a complex technical thing to look at. It's a little bit like putting, calorific numbers onto thing. Not everybody is going to be able to process that information and come to a conclusion. I mean, what other things can we do to sort of push that process forward? Because it seems to me that nobody's looking at it now.
Well, I suppose it's education, or essentially early adopters showing around what can be done once you have an IoT product that really works the way it's supposed to work.
I suppose one of the things, just to dive down a bit of a rabbit hole, would be when you have smart cities driving the development of IoT, in particular geographical, they can kind of set they can set rules for deployment if they're running it. And I wonder how much, public-spirited rules that actually benefit the consumer rather than benefit the provider. I wonder if that's one good reason why we should support smart cities.
Well, I think it's a very good idea, but I'm afraid that smart cities are probably going to lag behind the consumer market, very much because you need to do an upfront investment in order for IoT to work. And cities very often are essentially busy with firefighting rather
Yes.
than investing into sort of futuristic technology.
Yes. Well, we can only hope.
We can only hope.
Boris, thank you very much. That's very interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.